Okay. Well, I'd like to welcome everybody today to talk about one of our first presentations here on Mighty Networks, and it's going to be a review of the MoLeap resources that DESE has recently made available. And so we're going to try to keep this video short. We have a couple of live participants on the call who can help give us some questions and ideas of how they're using these things within their district. And just a reminder, thank you so much if you've joined Missouri Instructional Leaders Network. We're still new, but the goal is to provide a PLC, a virtual PLC opportunity across the state of Missouri for instructional leaders. As all of you know, it's sometimes you are siloed and a lonely position. So I'm hoping to get more feedback from those of you in the network to start sharing all the great things you are doing. So the goal of today's presentation is a small one. It's to provide information about some of the curriculum and assessment resources that are now available, specifically the MoLeap blocks, assessments, and benchmarks. And at the end of this, we will be discussing ways with the panel on our call of ways these things can be implemented at district and building levels. So I want to start with a little bit of background because the development of many of these happened prior to pandemic occurring. And so one of the barriers pre-pandemic was we were having a lack of social studies and science being incorporated into the instruction. And so DESE actually had, I've hyperlinked it here and I'll share the presentation, Nell Duke even sharing some information about the impact of social studies and science and just how important it is for kids to get that content and how it causes greater achievement gaps if we're not doing it. And so you'll notice in some of these resources, it's very heavy in social studies and science, and it's a response to try to provide some of those resources to districts so we can begin integrating and teaching those subjects again. And also some barriers were clarity of standards. Teachers, those aren't always on target. We weren't always interpreting those correctly. Our assessments in districts were not always aligning. And so then therefore some of our instruction and lessons were not aligning with state standards. So in as a response now post-pandemic, DESE was on it again and they said, okay, we need to do accelerated learning. They brought in the new teacher project who had done parts with the evidence project and had presented on, you really need to accelerate learning, which is have some priority standards of what kids need to know and just teach those few things very well. In response, some districts said, well, gosh, we don't have priority standards. So to try to help that, the state developed and is still developing some draft priority standards to try to support districts on what those key priority standards should be within each core content. And then the development of the Mo blocks that was were happening with social studies and science were incorporated. They've now have MoLeap assessments available and they have some MoLeap benchmark assessments. So really what happened August 2020, what we see here in parentheses is the state is saying post-pandemic, you need to identify priority standards. If you've been all virtual, you may even need to prioritize your priorities. You need to make sure you've distributed those in a pacing throughout the way, that you have some ways of assessing those, informative and summative ways, and you prioritize and be able to scaffold for teachers. So utilizing your PLCs in this process is very imperative. And just a clarification, a lot of people, they wanted to make sure that we distinguish accelerated is not remediation. Acceleration is going ahead and pushing forward with grade level standards, doing assessment for learning. So you're not doing a ton of diagnostics and spending time assessing. We need to be teaching and we need to be scaffolding the skills and not remediating students. So I want to give you a quick timeline. I said they were doing these priority standards for districts. Those started back in August. They put their first draft out, got feedback from districts, and social studies and science were pretty much adopted. Okay, and so they're pretty much ready to go. Social studies is using the tools of inquiry as their priority standards. And ELA and math had a lot of feedback from districts. So they're on their second version. And starting around February 24th and 25th, they're going to be having more content meetings for people to give feedback, be doing surveys, and their goal is to have those adopted by April. It's important that everybody knows those priority standards are not expected to officially be adopted. They are still recommendations. You have local control. to add or take away from that set list, but knowing they have had work groups of experienced content-based educators across the state of Missouri who are vetting those and recommending them. So there is a lot of high validity in the ones they do recommend, but you always have local control. So let's go back to these 3 resources. And this chart is to try to help you distinguish the difference and how you might use those. So the first resource are Mo blocks. These were created in the response to the social studies and science integration. So you'll see that they are correlated with ELA in each of these assessments. Currently, they're available 3 through 8. Their goal is that they could be available 3 through EOC. They're starting to add those. But really, these blocks are to be used for instruction and formative assessment. So if you did not have social studies and science textbooks, there are about 4 passages and 4 activities. Teachers could teach 3 of those and use 1 as an assessment. So these are instructional and formative assessment blocks that can support teachers, and they are found on an external website that I will share just so you have quick access. And I'm actually going to do a walk of the DESE webpage just so you can know where to find these things, because that's half the battle sometimes. So the next thing that was created are these MoLeap assessments. And again, they're continually being added to, currently 3 through 8, wanting to go up to EOC. The summative, these assessments, in my opinion, are more summative assessment over a set group of standards for that content. So it'd be like a small unit summative assessment over a grouping of standards. You do have the capability of taking this within a window set by the state. The fall window has already closed, but if you do take it within that recommended window, it will be scored for you and it will generate reports back to you, which is very helpful. However, if you don't make the window, at any time, districts can take those assessments for practice and score. I think it scores the multiple choice, but you'd score the others on your own and have to just extract your own data from that. These MoLeap assessments are found within DRC. These are very helpful when we talk about that alignment piece of standards and assessment that can help us get there by using these. And then last are the MoLeap benchmarks. These, and they are up to EOC content levels. These are benchmark practice tests to be taken 1 time a year to help districts get a baseline of how students would score. You can see up here in italics, I have December 1 through January 29. That is the state window of when these assessments are to be taken, because again, it's supposed to give you some insight on how kids would do the map, which would give you February, March to use those detailed reports in order to adjust your instruction. If you do not take it inside that window, you could still, again, take it outside that window, but it would have to be scored separately and you wouldn't get all those fancy reports. In the reports, they do tell you the DOK, item type, standard reports, and the Lexile. So though, if you take it within the window, you will get some fairly detailed reports. And the benchmarks, like the MoLeap assessments, are found within DRC. So I'm gonna hop out of this for a moment and go to the DESE website. I just wanna make sure everyone on the call is aware of how to actually get to these resources. So I apologize, I have not mastered all of Zoom to toggle back and forth very easily. So I'm gonna bring back up. If you go to your screen, oh boy, my husband's keeping the kids entertained downstairs and they are very loud. If you go to the DESE website, so I just type in DESE here, and you go under educators and curriculum, and then scroll down at the bottom right here, you will actually see a little nugget after all of the contents that actually say MoLeap. This is a great site because this is where you can find all 3 of the resources I've talked about. So we've got the blocks, the assessment, and the benchmarks. There's actually a webinar you can take to do that, to look at more of the benchmarks and how those go. And then, so access to the Mo blocks, those are actually an external site. So when you click on that and hit OK, it takes you to this external site that will then have all of the Mo blocks there. so you can get to them that way. You will see that they have in every content some K2. Those haven't been filled in yet. So the goal is to have all of these K through 12, and they're continually adding to these. So some new ELA ones were just added the past few weeks. You click on the grade level, and then it has the assessments there. What I've noticed, it's great to start on this teacher notes column, because this will tell you all of the standards that are correlated within this test. So within the teacher, not only will have a scoring guide, you can see which standards will be covered in it for ELA and for science. So one recommendation, as I'm working with one district, is I've gone through and correlated their social studies and science to their pacing guide in their ELA to try to show the connection so they could teach them at the same time. And I'm able to hyperlink some of these assessments and say, hey, you're working on R1AB in this unit, check out questions 3 and 5 from this assessment, because they could help you. Because I think there's some way we have to help educators feel where these assessments will fit in. And the intent behind them is you don't have to give the entire assessment or the entire block. You can use parts of it. So you might look at current common assessments and take a couple questions from here and put it into a current common assessment just to make sure you have some aligned items. But again, wanted to make sure you know that teacher version has the standard alignments, the different types of questions and the answers in it. From this main site, you can read about the Mo benchmark assessment and the Mo LEAPS, but again, you'll have to go through your DTC, or if you have a DRC login, all of those components will be found there. So I know I'm going lightning speed fast, but I've talked a little bit about recommendations, and I do just want to go ahead and in here, and then I would love to hear from the panel on the call that this is a time to really be leveraging your PLCs. And so, you know, protocols are a really great way to have that. So whether you're looking at your, if you have proficiency scales, I would start there. And here's just an example of how within your PLCs, you could begin looking at your proficiency scales and anchoring yourselves to some of these state released items and talking about, do our assessments currently match up? What kind of skills is it going to take kids to get this, and working backward designing with your PLC to talk about instructionally how you're going to scaffold up so that you can stay on rigor. So here's just a timeline to kind of summarize all of the things we've talked about. In July and August, DESE had this accelerated learning response. We've got some draft standards. Now they're in a second draft form. We're hoping that they'll be finalized in April. Spring 2021 testing is still scheduled to happen, even though it will not be for accountability. We're wanting that to occur. But in spring of 2022, blueprints and assessments will be changing to align to these priority standards. The state is starting to get an assessment task force together to try to talk about what the future blueprints in 2022 will look like and how much of the priority standards it will be shifted to. And then all along in this red, you can see we've had this development of Mo blocks and assessments that are available to teachers to really help address everything on this timeline in accelerated learning. So at this point, I have talked a lot. I would love to open it up to people on the call of if you have ideas of how your district might be using these, questions or any comments about some of the resources that we just walked through.
Shauna, I have a question, and it's probably somewhere in DESE, but tell me the difference between how DESE is using the practice tests versus like the MAP and EOC practice tests versus the Mo LEAP benchmarks and assessments.
Well, Val is on the call, and this is interesting because she and I met earlier, and she had just asked Sean Bates from DESE this exact question. And so, Val, I'm going to try to answer, but please chime in if you think that I leave something out.
Sure.
DESE's recommendation via Sean was that they would recommend taking the benchmark for your practice map, because if you take it in that window, it'll be scored for you and you can get these reports, and they say that they would use the released forms as bell ringers or practice instruction daily, to model to kids types of questions in small snippets. But his recommendation, from what I heard from her, was they would be switching to the benchmark assessment for your practices now and using the others for instructional piece. Val, did I miss anything?
No, I think you're exactly right. And I was just rereading his response, and I don't know if it's important to point out, but he said that the benchmark assessments they're secure. The released items are actually public and available, the practice forms. So I guess that, that's significant. One question I still have lingering is, so if you go into DRC, you can get the LEAP assessments. I'm not seeing that you can get the benchmarks in a PDF format. So I'm inferring that the only way to actually get the benchmark is when the kids log in and see it.
And I wonder if it also coincides with that window, if maybe it's not even available. I don't know. But I think it goes back to your secure comment that they're securing it within DRC. So it's either a login issue. I'm betting you can't get it PDF like the forms. But again, that's speculation. So that might be one of the things on our list that we try to get. I know you've already sent one. So as we get clarification, we could post on here.
Well, and so that makes me wonder, another question is, how does the LEAP assessment compare to the benchmark? Because from what I'm seeing, the LEAP assessment is summative. It's a rigorous, it's a beefy assessment. It's not like the blocks that are, smaller. And so what is the difference? Is the difference that the benchmarks are only secure, that we can't look at them and use them for instruction, or, for our own summatives?
Well, it's my interpretation, and Cheryl, you may know more too, because I know you sit on a lot of state calls. I believe that the benchmark will cover an array of skills, from vocabulary to comprehension to informational text to fictional text. They'll read multiple sources and things like that, where even though the MOLEAPs look bigger, they are still just covering about 4 or 5 standards rather than a larger range. So they are summative, but more of a unit summative of a cluster of standards rather than accumulation of many various on grade level standards. Cheryl, do you have any more to add to that? You think I'm on track there?
No, in fact, yesterday I spent a lot of time looking at the MOLEAP assessments and then the release, and they're almost, the assessments and the practice tests are almost exactly, they're not the same, but they are summative. And so I was looking at the 4th grade, and there was a section on literacy where there was a passage, and all those standards were within that, just like the MAP test. And they had a writing and a reading section where everybody, even 3rd, all the non-testing grades had writing that they had to do that would need to be scored. But they look a lot like those practice tests. I mean, I haven't talked to anybody at the state about them.
Okay, so, and I would agree. So I do think they are. So when we talk about the barriers before, the alignment is definitely there. They are very tightly aligned. It's almost like a mini MAP assessment, but they should be completed in probably 30 or 40 minutes, I would guess, where I think the benchmark is going to take you more like 2 hours, multiple sessions, because it's similar to taking the real MAP.
I think we're talking about 2 different things. I don't know, maybe. Are you talking about the blocks? Like the blocks are short little, several stimuluses, and then there are questions that are like 3rd grade had the butterfly ones,
yes,
or the dragonfly ones. And then the assessment one is just like those practice tests where there's like 3 or 4 sessions, multiple questions.
See, a specific MOLEAP assessment I looked at was just 3 or 4. It just had 1 passage and like 5 questions. So maybe I haven't looked at all grade levels. So that would probably be a continuation follow-up for our group to post. And I can research that with some DESE coordinator, just to kind of help give us some clarification of what would be their recommendation of when these MOLEAP assessments would fit in. For districts I'm working with, you know, we have talked about using those to kind of vet some of our own common assessments. And again, DESE has said all along, you don't have to give this assessment in its entirety, but you definitely now can piecemeal it and take things. And so I know many districts were thinking about, okay, let's look at our current assessments, figure out some of these MOLEAP assessments that are aligned, and stealing some of their question types, whether it be reordering our questions to look like theirs, or if we needed more passages and we in your district who doesn't have assessments in place, gosh, I'd just be pulling from those. But you may not want to give the whole thing. You might want to condense it.
What's nice about those is that the reading, the passages, you're not having to go out there and look for passages, because in my district a couple of years ago, we started the process of building some assessments. Finding the passages and was more time consuming than even writing those questions. So having those passages and then writing some questions that, you know, take the ones that are there and then adding more questions based on the other standards that you needed, but you have that framework and you can see how the questions are worded or written or, and we've even looked at other questions or passages that might have a different standard and looked how those were worded and then try to write something that goes with a different passage. Just having that guideline from the state is just invaluable.
It is. You know, I was excited when the item specifications came out, and this just took it to a whole new level because they've actually given us, like you said, an ELA finding those passages. And now you have these social studies and science passages that are on grade level that are tied to ELA. So if you are a district who hasn't been teaching social studies and science as well, now you have some text and some background knowledge to be using to teach with students. And I think the key piece here is we're also building the knowledge base for teachers around as we're making those assessments to get clarity for themselves. When we talk about lessons aren't aligning, it is not because the teacher doesn't intend to align it. It is, I didn't understand, and we've all been there in the classroom of that was the intent of the standard. And when you start with the assessment questions and teachers are taking those and looking at them, it helps them get a clear idea of, oh, this is where I need to get my students to go. This is the type of skills they need, so they can begin backward designing and planning within their PLCs. So another way they could be using those is just looking at a couple of MOLEAPs that are related to the unit they're coming up with and having a PLC conversation of how does this differ from what we originally thought of this standard, and how might we need to adjust our current unit plans to make sure our rigor is there. Any more questions or thoughts for the call? You know, I knew I would end up going over, so we're about 25 minutes, so I will definitely wrap up. But I'd just like to thank everyone who did attend. Hello, Poonam. I know you were hopping in from another meeting.
I missed it.
No problem. Well, I'm going to go ahead and record this for our group and post it on Mighty Networks. Everyone watching, and even those of you who came today, please feel free to post as you think of other ideas or other questions to this stream of video so that we could get some good collaboration going among the great leaders in Missouri. Thank you for attending.